Hello everyone and welcome to the sixth section, Overview of Test Controller. In the previous section, we took the scripting approach and learned about bin shell scripting and also the usage of post and preprocessors. Then we saw how can we generate dynamic values with bin shell sampler. Now in this section, Overview of Test Controller, we will understand in detail the different types of controllers that are essential for our test and their usage. So let's begin. Let's see what we are going to cover in this section. We will begin our section with understanding about the listeners and their role when it comes to capturing the test results. Then we will take a look at two most widely used listeners. Those are aggregate report and view results tree. Let's start our section with listeners. Now listeners are JMeter component that can be used to capture the test results and it displays the details about the test execution. Listeners also has an option to capture these details in the file format. For example, if we have any errors or warning messages, then we can capture those details in the file format and then we can share those details with the team to analyze it further or to resolve issues if there are any. It also offers the visual representation of the data in the graphical format or in the tabular format. Also, the test execution logs can be captured to analyze it further. So it plays a very crucial role when it comes to analyzing the performance of the JMeter test based on the provided input data and generated output data. So let's see what are the different types of listeners JMeter offers. So for that, let's go to JMeter and here we are going to use the same test that we created in section 2 for random order controller. Now let's see what do we have here. In case of the users, we have number of threads which are users set to 1. Let's change it to 5. And then increase the loop count from 3 to 5 again. Now let's see in terms of the samplers what do we have. So we have a login sampler with the sign on sampler request. Then in case of the random order controller, since it's disabled, let's enable it. And inside that we have first simple, then second simple and third simple controllers with the samplers inside that for the purchase or reservation. And finally we have a sign off controller. Inside that we have a sign of sampler. Now we will be taking a look at view results tree and aggregate report in the following videos. So for this video we will be covering aggregate graph, view results in table, summary report, graph results and response time graph. Now all these listeners you can add from users. Just right click on users, select add and then listeners, and here we have list of all listeners. Now remember one thing, whenever you are going to add any listener, if you add it at the sampler level, it's going to listen to that sampler only and it will display details about that sampler only. Now if you want to view the result for the entire test, then you should be adding at the thread level and not at the individual sampler level. Alright, so let's clear the logs and run the test so that we can view each of these listeners separately and we'll see what do we get here. So let's start the execution. So it has begun already. So let's go to the view results in table and as you can see it has begun the execution and we have the details in the tabular format, such as we have details for the thread name, the start time, then we have the sampler name, and then we have a response time in milliseconds with the status, then the bytes, the response bytes where we can see a thread name and the sampler request name, then the response time from the server in milliseconds, then we have its status, and then the number of bytes it took to respond to a request, then the latency and so on. Now let's quickly check the summary report and here you can see the summary for each of these samplers. Now if you notice here, it's a summarized version of what we see in the view results in table. Now here, each of these samplers has been executed separately and that's the reason you will see requests going in every single row until the row number is 300 here and it began with the row number 1. That means for each of the sampler that it executed, it shows the details. But in case of the summary report, it combines at the sampler level and that's the reason you will see the sign on request or the sign on sampler got executed 25 times and this was the average time it took. Then this is the minimum time it took, then the maximum time, and the standard deviation, the error, throughput, and all other details. Now similarly, if we go to the graph result, so here you can view the details based on what you have configured. For example, the average time it took to respond to a request is represented in a blue color. Then in case of the deviation, we have a red color which is slightly displayed here. Then for throughput, we have like green color here, and for median, we have this pink color here. So like that you can view the details. And then we have response time graph. Now here in case of the graphs option, you can view a graphical representation of the data. And if you notice at the bottom of the page, we have the sampler's name and their corresponding values, like when it began and when it ended. And on the y-axis, we have time in milliseconds. That means it displays how much time it took to respond to a request, and that's how it represented here for our test. So you can analyze this data further and share with your teams. If you have any issues, then they can analyze and try to improve the performance of the test. So that's all for this video. I'll see you in the next video where we will discuss about view results tree and view results report and see how it's different from other listeners that we have seen so far.